Commander Verlake stood on the command dais of the Iron Maw, his 4 eyes fixed on the burning planet below. Viridia Prime, once a jewel of green oceans and silver cities, now a smoldering wound in the void. Smoke curled from its continents like dying breaths. The final stand of the coalition of free systems was crumbling, and Verlake could taste victory in the recycled air of his ship, cold, clean, and certain. The Qatari hegemony did not celebrate. Celebration was chaos, disorder, weakness, but inside Verlake's chitinous chest, something like satisfaction hummed. For 83 cycles, the hegemony had pushed outward, folding star systems into its perfect order. Every world fell the same way: resistance, then compliance, then silence. The math was flawless. The outcome inevitable. Until now, Viridia had held longer than expected. Not because its people were strong, they were soft, emotional, scattered, but because they refused to accept the logic of surrender. They clung to hope like it was armor, and that made them unpredictable. Unpredictability was the one thing the Qatari could not compute easily. Still, it was ending. The orbital defense grid was gone. The last fleet patchwork frigates and civilian haulers retrofitted with guns had been shattered 2 rotations ago. Only one thing remained: the planetary shield dome over New Atria, the capital. It flickered now, like a dying star, its energy core overloaded and unstable. "Report," Verlake said, his voice clicking through the ship's neural link. "The final barrage is ready." "Commander," came the reply from Tactical. "Shield collapse estimated in 1.2 cycles. Ground forces can begin sterilization sweep at your order." Verlake did not answer at once. His mind ran the scenarios. Sterilization, burning the surface clean, was efficient, but wasteful. The hegemony preferred to repurpose, to rebuild, to turn rebels into obedient labor. Yet Viridia had cost them too much. Ships lost, time wasted, dignity bruised. "Begin Phase 1 bombardment," he ordered. "Target military sites only. Leave infrastructure intact." For now, a murmur of approval rippled through the hive link. Discipline held. Order, but deep in the outer edge of the system, near the silent graveyard of dead comets, something moved. It was small. A single vessel, no larger than a scout drone. Paint peeling, hull scarred, engine sputtering. The Whisper of Dawn, last courier of the free systems. On board, Captain Elias Wren clutched the controls with blistered hands. He hadn't slept in 2 days. His ship's oxygen recycler was failing, but he had one job left: send the message. He'd argued with his council until his voice broke. "They're myths," they'd said. "Fairy tales for scared children." But Wren remembered his grandfather's stories tales of a blue world where creatures walked upright, fought wars over ideas, and tamed lightning in metal cages. A world so violent, so wild, that no sane species would ever land there. They called it Sol 3. They called its people Deathworlders. Wren didn't know if they were real, but he knew the Qatari weren't stopping. And if myths were all that remained, then myths would have to answer. With trembling fingers, he activated the emergency channel, a frequency so old, most nav computers didn't even list it anymore. It crackled to life, raw and unfiltered. "This is Captain Elias Wren of the Coalition vessel Whisper of Dawn," he gasped, blood dripping from a gash on his temple. "Viridia Prime is falling. The Qatari are at the gate. If anyone hears this, if the stories are true, please send help. From Sol, send the Deathworlders." He repeated it 3 times. Then, with the last of his power, he triggered the ship's self-destruct, not to vanish, but to scatter the signal in every direction, riding the shockwave into the unknown. Then silence. Back on the Iron Maw, Verlake's sensor officer stiffened. "Commander." Anomalous burst transmission detected. Origin, Oort cloud fringe. Encrypted on archaic human band frequencies. Voic turned. Human? The extinct species from Sol? Unknown. But the phrase used, Deathworlders, matches pre-hegemony xenohistorical records. Varlok let out a dry rasp Kaitari laughter. Primitive superstition. The humans wiped themselves out millennia ago in atmospheric wars. Their sun system is a dead zone. Mark it as noise. Purge it. Yes, Commander. The signal vanished from the logs. Forgotten. Dismissed. But somewhere, far beyond the edge of known space, past asteroid belts and frozen gas giants, a lonely station orbiting a dwarf planet picked up the echo. Navcom Station Theta. Pluto orbit. Technician Marlin was half asleep when the alert chimed. Ancient frequency. Emergency protocol. She almost deleted its spam from some deep-core historian playing games. But habit made her run a cross-check. The word Deathworlders lit up in red. Her eyes widened. No way. She pulled up the old archives. Pre-Unity files. Buried deep. There it was. Earth Sol 3. Classified as clashy Deathworld by early off-world scouts. Gravity too high. Atmosphere toxic in parts. Oceans full of things that ate metal. And the natives? They didn't just survive. They thrived. They fought each other for sport. They tamed fire, split atoms, walked on the moon, all before they even had clean water for everyone. And they called themselves Deathworlders. Not with shame. With pride. Mara's hands flew over the console. She patched the signal through to High Command on Luna. Within minutes, every top admiral in the Terran hegemony was awake. In the war room beneath Mari Imbrium. Fleet Admiral Cho stared at the playback of Ren's message. His face was stone, but his eyes burned. They remembered our name, he said softly. Around him, generals argued. It's a trap. We don't even know if the coalition is real. We reveal ourselves, and every empire within 1,000 light years will come knocking. Cho silenced them with a look. 200 years ago, we swore an oath. Not to conquer, not to dominate. But this, no species that calls us by our true name shall be abandoned. He stood. Prep Task Force Ragnarok. Full combat loadout. Until the indomitable. It's time to remind the galaxy why they whisper about us in the dark. Back at Varia, Verloc watched the shield finally collapse. Flames rose from New Atria. His ground legions descended like silent angels of order. Victory was his dot. He did not know that. At that very moment, 50 human warships were powering up their drives in the cold dark beyond Pluto, engines humming with restrained violence. Hulls scarred from asteroid mining wars and Martian dust storms. Crews chewing gum, telling jokes, and checking their weapons with calm hands. They were coming, not as saviors, not as diplomats, but as boats. Deathworlders. And the Kaitari had never seen anything like them. Earth was not kind. It never had been. Its gravity pulled harder than most worlds. Its air carried traces of old poisons. Its oceans boiled with storms, and its land shifted without warning. But humans did not complain. They adapted. They built. They fought. They won. By the year 2187, Earth was no longer just a planet. It was a fortress. A legend. A warning. The Terran hegemony ruled not through fear alone, but through a simple truth. Humanity had survived everything its own world and itself could throw at it. Ice ages, nuclear winters, plagues that ate flesh, wars that cracked continents. And still, they stood, taller, angrier, smarter. Navcom Station Theta hung in the black above Pluto, a lonely eye watching the edge of human space. Technician Marilyn had replayed the SOS 3 times. Each time, her pulse beat faster. The voice was weak, broken, but the words were clear. Send the Deathworlders. She sent the file to Luna Command with shaking hands. Within minutes, alarms rang not in panic, but in purpose deep beneath the moon's gray surface. In a room lined with steel and history, Admiral Cho listened to the message again. Around him, generals and fleet officers stood in silence. Some were old enough to remember the Unity Wars, when humans stopped killing each other and turned their rage outward. The signal is real, said General Reyes, her cybernetic eye glowing faintly. But Sol hasn't broadcast its location in over a century. If we respond, the whole galaxy learns where we are. And if we don't, said Cho, we become the thing we swore we'd never be, cowards hiding in the dark. He walked to the wall screen. On it glowed a map of human space, Mars, armored in red rock. Titan, humming with fusion plants. The Belt, crawling with miners who could gut a man with a screwdriver. And Earth Blue, angry, alive. 200 years ago, Cho said. We dug ourselves out of our own graves. We looked up and said, never again will we be victims. But that promise means nothing if we only protect ourselves. He turned. The Coalition used the right word. Not humans, not Terrans. Deathworlders. That's not a name you use unless you know what it means. Unless you're begging the storm to come. A young lieutenant spoke up. But sir, are we sure they're not trying to lure us into a trap? Cho almost smiled. Let them try. Orders flew. Across the solar system, docks lit up. Shipyards that had been quiet for decades roared back to life. On Mars, workers pulled tarpaulins off warships that hadn't flown since the Jovian uprising. In the rings of Saturn, drone carriers powered up their engines, shaking off ice crystals like old ghosts. Task Force Ragnarok was born in less than 6 hours. 50 ships. Not the full Terran Navy, just enough to make a statement. At its heart floated the UN's Indomitable, a dreadnought longer than 3 city blocks, its hull scarred from asteroid skirmishes and deep space trials. It carried no luxury, no diplomats, just Marines, engineers, medics, and enough firepower to crack a small moon. Captain Aris Thorne stood on its bridge, arms crossed, watching his crew run final checks. He was lean, with sunburned skin and eyes that had seen vacuum breaches and survived. His people moved with calm speed. No shouting, no panic. Just work. Engines green, said the pilot. Weapons hot, said the gunnery chief. Marines report ready, came the comms officer. Sergeant Voss says they've got extra ammo. And pizza. Thorne grunted. Pizza was standard pre-combat ration. It kept morale up. And humans fought better when they were full. Back on Earth, in the shadow of the Himalayas, children played war games in the snow. They didn't know about Viridia, but they knew the stories of how their ancestors walked on Mars with nothing but courage and duct tape, of how they beat machines that wanted to enslave them, of how they tamed a planet that wanted them dead. Now, their fleet was going to do it again, far from home. For strangers, because that's what Deathworlders did. On Luna, Admiral Cho stood alone in the observation dome. Earth hung below him, blue and furious. He whispered the old oath. Every Terran child learned it in school. We do not start wars, but we end them. At Navcom Theta, Marilyn watched the fleet assemble on her screen. 50 bright dots against the endless dark. She thought of Captain Wren, dying alone in the void, sending a cry into nothingness. And now, that cry had been heard. The Indomitable's comms officer patched through a final message to all ships. Remember who we are, Thorne said, voice low but clear. We're not heroes. We're not monsters. We're the thing that shows up when the monsters think they've won. A cheer rose not loud, but deep, like thunder under stone. Then, one by one, the ships opened their slipstream drives. Space bent. Light twisted. And in a flash of blue-white energy, Task Force Ragnarok vanished from human space. They jumped not with elegance, but with brute force using chaotic math that made alien II systems crash. Human navigation didn't follow clean lines. It followed instincts, guesswork, and old sailors' tricks from an ocean planet. They would arrive not where the enemy expected, but where they were needed most. Halfway across the galaxy. On the bridge of the Iron Maw, Commander Verloc received no warning. His sensors saw nothing. His prophets predicted nothing. The Qatari hegemony believed in order, in patterns, in perfect control. They did not believe in pale apes from a blue rock who laughed while bleeding, who fixed broken engines with chewing gum and hope, who called their homeworld a death trap and wore it like a badge. But belief didn't matter. Now, because the Deathworlders were coming, and they didn't knock. They kicked the door down. As the fleet tore through slipstream. Captain Thorne leaned back in his chair. He wasn't afraid. Fear was wasted energy. He checked his sidearm loaded, his helmet ready, his crew dash calm. Somewhere ahead. A world was dying. And humanity, for all its flaws, had never been good at watching people die when they could stop it, even if those people were strangers, even if it cost them everything. The stars blurred outside the viewport. The hum of the drive filled the ship like a heartbeat. Earth was far behind now, but its sons and daughters carried its spirit in their bones, the spirit of a species that never bowed. Not to nature, not to gods, and certainly not to aliens who thought war was a clean, quiet thing. War to humans was messy. Loud. And very, very personal. The fleet raced on, silent and sharp, like wolves in the night. Soon, the galaxy would learn the truth. The Deathworlders weren't a myth. They were a promise, and promises, once made, had to be kept. Space around Viridia Prime was quiet. Too quiet. The Qatari fleet floated in perfect formation, like statues carved from black metal. Their victory was near. The planetary shield was gone. Cities burned. Resistance was broken. Commander Verloc allowed himself a moment of stillness. Order had been restored. Then the sky tore open, not with a neat slipstream jump, the clean, controlled kind the Qatari used, but with a violent rip, like fabric shredding. Blue fire flashed. Space itself seemed to scream. From the tier came 50 ships. They did not line up. They did not announce themselves. They simply appeared and attacked. The lead ship, massive and scarred, fired before it had fully exited slipstream. A single tungsten rod, longer than a city street, shot forward at a third the speed of light. It struck the Qatari orbital command station. There was no explosion, just a flash, then silence. The station vanished, turned to vapor by kinetic force. Alarms blared across the Qatari fleet. Unknown vessels. Origin unknown. Weapons active. Verloc's mind raced. This made no sense. No species jumped this deep into enemy space without scouts. No species fired before speaking. No species moved like this, wild, fast, unpredictable. Identify them. He ordered. Unknown design, said the sensor officer. Hull markings. Sol Terran hegemony. Species, Homo sapiens. Verloc froze. Impossible. That species is extinct. But the ships kept coming. The human fleet split apart like shrapnel. Some dove toward the planet. Others looped behind asteroids. One small corvette even flew straight through the wreckage of a dead coalition ship, using the debris as cover. Qatari targeting systems struggled. There are unexpected patterns. Human ships gave none. On the bridge of the UN's Indomitable, Captain Thorne barked orders. Send in the Hornets. Target their comms-arrays. And tell Vostrop the Marines on Station Gamma. Use the smoke plume for cover. Aye, sir, came the reply. Sergeant Kirova stood in the assault bay. Her armor scuffed, her face painted with black stripes, old Earth tradition. Around her, 20 Marines checked weapons, shared gum, and joked about who owed who credits. Remember, Vos said, they think war is clean. We're gonna teach them it's dirty. The drop pods launched. They streaked down like falling stars, punching through the thin upper atmosphere of Viridia. Katari drones tried to intercept, but the pods spun, twisted, and released chaff made from shredded metal and old circuit boards. It confused the drone sensors. The Marines hit Station Gamma A Tatari supply outpost orbiting low. They breached the hull with plasma cutters. Inside, the Katari warriors froze. They expected formal boarding protocol. They got humans with shotguns, grenades, and a dog named Rex, who wasn't a dog, but a bioengineered combat hound with 3 eyes. Vos took down 3. Katari with a knife before they realized she wasn't waiting for them to aim. Back in space, human frigates danced between enemy lines. They fired not just weapons, but junk old fuel tanks, broken drones, even frozen waste canisters. The Katari shields couldn't decide what was a threat. Some overloaded, trying to block everything. One human pilot, laughing over comms, shouted, "Eat space trash, bugs!" Before ramming a dead satellite into a Katari cruiser's engine vent. The ship spun out of control, crashing into its own ally. On the surface of Viridia, surviving coalition fighters watched in disbelief. There, winning? Whispered a young rebel, her face covered in soot. Her commander stared at the sky. No, they're not winning. They're playing. And it was true. The humans weren't just fighting to win. They were fighting to break the Katari mind. They played music over enemy channels, old Earth songs, distorted and loud. Twinkle, twinkle, little star, looped for 20 minutes until Katari telepaths suffered mental fatigue. They sent fake surrender signals, then ambushed rescue ships. They repaired damaged human ships in mid-battle, welding hull plates while under fire, using spare parts from dead enemies. One engineer on the Indomitable famously fixed a broken reactor with duct tape. Chewing gum and a prayer to Saint Elan, a joke saint. But they swore it worked. Commander Verloc watched his fleet fall apart. Ships lost. Communications jammed. Morale cracking. His warriors, trained for perfect order, were panicking. How? He whispered. How can they be so chaotic and still function? A junior officer dared to speak. Commander, maybe chaos is their function. Verloc had no answer. On the ground, human Marines linked up with Viridian rebels. They didn't ask for plans. They just handed out weapons and said, "Show us where they hurt." The rebels led them to a Katari command bunker. The humans didn't blast the door. They pumped in a fast-growing fungus stolen from Venusian labs. It ate through metal in minutes. Inside, the Katari choked on spores that corroded their armor from the inside. Later, Vos sat on a broken tank, sharing a protein bar with a rebel girl. "You're really from Earth?" The girl asked. "Yep. Is it true you fight wars over?" "Songs." Vos grinned. "Nah, over pizza toppings." The girl laughed, a sound not heard on Viridia in months. Above them, the Indomitable turned its main gun on a Katari dreadnought. But instead of firing, it broadcast a message in every known language, including Katari. You came to a world that fights back. Now you meet the ones who taught it how. Then it fired. The dreadnought exploded. The tide had turned, not because humans had better tech, not because they were stronger, but because they refused to fight the enemy's war. They fought their own. Messy, loud, brutal, and alive. Qatari ships began to retreat. Not in formation. In fear, Verloc watched his perfect war fall apart like sand through claws. He had faced logic. He had faced strength, but he had never faced madness with a purpose. And that, he realized too late, was the most dangerous kind on as the last Qatari carrier fled. A human corvette chased it not to destroy it, but to paint a symbol on its hull with spray drones, a skull, with a grin. The old Earth sign for "We're coming for you next." Back on the Indomitable, Captain Thorne allowed himself a small smile. Phase 1 was done. Now came the hard part, making sure the Qatari never forgot what happened here. Because Deathworlders didn't just save people, they made sure no one dared hurt them again. The Qatari High Synod met in the heart of their homeworld, deep beneath crystal spires that had stood for 10,000 cycles. The air was still, the light soft and blue. Everything was in its place, but fear lived in the silence. Commander Verloc stood before the Synod, his carapace scarred, his mind shaken. He had returned from Viridia not in victory, but in shame. Behind him, on the great screen, footage played, human ships weaving through fire, Marines laughing as they stormed enemy stations, a dreadnought firing while its crew argued over snack rations. "This is not war," said Elder Zen, voice trembling. "This is madness." "No," Verloc replied. "It is something worse. It is adaptation." The Synod had always believed war was a science. Clean, predictable, a matter of numbers and timing. But the humans did not follow rules. They made new ones in the middle of battle. They turned weakness into weapons. They used broken things to break stronger things. "We must respond with overwhelming force," said Warlord Kex. "Deploy the Void Reapers. Glass Viridia. Let nothing remain." The Void Reapers were the hegemony's final answer, planet-killing warships, each armed with gravity lances, capable of cracking a world's core. They had never been used. Until now, 3 Reapers launched from the outer shipyards. Their black hulls drank the light. Their engines hummed with silent death. Back at Viridia, the humans knew they were coming. Captain Thorne studied the sensor logs. 3 big ones. No escorts. "They think we'll run. Will we?" asked his first officer. Thorne snorted. "We don't run from bullies." He called Sergeant Voss. "Time to get ugly." On the surface, humans and Viridians worked fast. They didn't build walls. They built traps. They rigged old buildings with explosives. They flooded tunnels with acid mist from salvaged Qatari fuel cells. They trained rebels to use human rifles, simple, rugged, deadly. In orbit, the Indomitable and its fleet did not form a line. They scattered. When the Void Reapers arrived, they expected a final stand. They got a swarm. Human fighters small, fast, and cheap dove at the Reapers like angry hornets. They didn't try to destroy them. They targeted the sensor arrays, the heat vents, the targeting lenses. One pilot even flew his ship into a Reaper's exhaust port, blowing his engine just to clog the system. The Reapers slowed. Confused. Then the real attack came. Human destroyers fired not missiles, but thousands of drone pods. Each pod burst open, releasing tiny machines that clung to the Reaper hulls like metal ticks. They didn't explode. They hacked. Human engineers had studied Qatari code during the fighting. They found patterns, weaknesses. Now, the drones fed false data into the Reapers' minds. Fake planet locations, false fleet positions, even fake surrender signals. From their own command, one Reaper fired its gravity, lance into empty space. Another locked onto a Qatari supply ship by mistake and tore it in half. The third tried to retreat, but human Marines had already boarded via magnetic grapplers. Inside, Sergeant Voss led her team through dark corridors. The Reaper was built like a temple, clean, wide, silent. But humans turned it into a slaughterhouse. They used flashbangs that overloaded Qatari hearing. They threw smoke grenades filled with pepper extract from earth farms. They fought room by room, never giving the enemy time to think. Voss reached the core chamber. There, a lone Qatari officer stood guard. "You cannot win," it hissed. "Your species is chaos. Chaos destroys itself." Voss reloaded her rifle. "Nah, chaos cleans house." She shot the core control panel. The Reaper's systems began to melt down. As her team fled, the great ship groaned like a dying god. Back on the Indomitable, Thorn watched the last Reaper explode, but his face was grim. They'll send more. Or something worse. He was right. Deep in Qatari space, the Synod made a desperate move. They sent a stealth vessel not to fight but to capture. They needed to understand the humans, to dissect their minds, to find the weakness in the madness. That ship found the Iron Fang, a human repair cruiser drifting near the battle zone. Its engines damaged. It boarded silently. Inside, they found not soldiers, but engineers eating, laughing, welding a broken pipe with sparks flying. The Qatari strike team moved fast. They stunned the crew, took control of the bridge, and seized logs, weapons, even food packets. But in the chaos, one human, a young tech named Jevi, pressed a hidden button under his seat. It sent a single ping to the Indomitable, and it unlocked the ship's self-destruct, not to destroy, but to trap. The Qatari vessel tried to flee, but the Iron Fang's docking clamps locked tight. Then the humans woke up. They hadn't been stunned. They'd faked it. Human nervous systems were tougher, and they trained for this. What followed was less battle, more brawl. Fists, pipes, fire extinguishers used as clubs. One engineer threw hot coffee in a Qatari's face. It's not poison, just really bad coffee. In minutes, the Qatari team was captured. Commander Verloc was among them. He had led the mission himself, desperate to see the enemy up close. Now, he stood in the Indomitable's brig, hands bound. Captain Thorn walked in. "You're the one giving orders," Verloc said. "Yep. Why do you fight like animals?" "No honor, no plan." Thorn leaned against the wall. "You think honor wins wars? We lost billions learning that lesson. Honor gets you buried. Survival wins." He gestured around. "See that?" He pointed to a screen showing engineers fixing a plasma conduit with tape and wire. "That's not chaos. That's choice. We choose to keep going, even when everything's broken." Volek watched them. Humans bled, cursed, laughed, and worked all at once. He thought of his own people. Perfect. Ordered, afraid of mess. And for the first time, he understood. The Deathworlders weren't strong because of their weapons. They were strong because their world never let them get soft. Earth had forged them in fire, flood and famine, and they had walked out smiling. Verloc bowed his head. "You will destroy us if we keep fighting." Thorn didn't gloat. "We don't want to destroy you. We just want you to stop hurting people who ask for help." Later, Verleole returned to his people, unharmed, but changed. He carried a message. "Tell your leaders, the Deathworlders are real, and they protect their own, even if their own are strangers." As his ship left human space, he looked back once. The Indomitable hung in orbit, battered but proud. Around it, humans rebuilt. Not just ships, hope. Volek knew the war wasn't over, but the Qatari would never see the galaxy the same way again. Because now, they knew, somewhere out there, on a blue rock spinning in the dark, lived a species that turned survival into a weapon, and that weapon had been awakened. The Qatari fleet withdrew, not in pieces, but in silence. No explosions, no final threats. Just a slow, orderly retreat into the dark between stars. Their ships moved like shadows leaving a room, as if ashamed to be seen running. On Viridia Prime, the fires still burned, but now, humans walked among the ruins with shovels, medkits, and seed packs. They didn't just fight. They rebuilt. Coalition survivors watched in quiet awe. Children peeked from broken doorways as human engineers patched power lines using scrap metal and old wiring. A medic named Ruiz handed out water filters to elders, showing them how to clean river water with sand and charcoal, just like we did after the Jakarta floods. He said, with a tired smile dotting the capital. New Atria, the last Qatari command post, had become a field hospital. Humans worked side by side with Viridians, stitching wounds, sharing meals, and trading stories in broken common tongue. One young rebel asked a Marine why they came. The Marine, her armor dented and her hair tied back in a messy bun, shrugged. Because you called us by our real name. That means you knew what we were. And that's enough. Word spread fast across the galaxy. The Qatari, unbeatable, flawless, feared, had been pushed back. Not by a bigger fleet. Not by secret weapons. But by humans. The mythical Deathworlders from Sol 3. Within days, signals poured in from 100 worlds. Some begged for help. Others offered alliance. A few just sent quiet thanks. The Coalition Council, once broken and hopeless, now stood tall in their rebuilt chamber. They invited Captain Thorn to speak. He came alone, in a clean uniform with no medals. "We don't want your seats," he said simply. "We don't want your treaties. We just ask one thing. Remember who answered your call." The council leader, an old Viridian with one cybernetic eye, bowed low. "We will tell our children, and their children, that when the sky went dark, the Deathworlders brought the dawn." Thorn nodded. Then he handed her a small data crystal. "This has Earth's coordinates. Use it only if you mean it." He turned to leave. "Wait," she called. "What do we tell others about you?" He paused at the door. "Tell them we're not monsters. We're not gods. We're just people from a hard world who don't like bullies." Back on the Indomitable, the crew prepared to leave. The ship was battered hull scorched, engines groaning, but flying. Marines cleaned their gear. Engineers patched leaks. In the mess hall, someone played an old guitar, singing a song about oceans and stars. Admiral Cho sent a message from Luna. "Task Force Ragnarok mission complete. Return home." But before they jumped, Captain Thorn ordered one last thing. On every surface the Qatari had touched, on ruined towers, on dead warships, even on the hull of the last Void Reaper, they left a mark. Not a name, not a flag, just a symbol, a simple skull with a grin. Not to scare. To warn. We were here. We saw what you did, and we'll come back if you do it again. As the fleet gathered for the return jump, a small ship approached the Coalition science vessel. It carried Commander Vrolak. He asked to speak on the Indomitable's observation deck. He stood beside Thorn, looking at the broken world below. "My people believed order was strength," Vrolak said. "We thought chaos was weakness. We were wrong." Thorn sipped black coffee. "Chaos isn't strength, but it's freedom. And freedom fights harder." Vrolak handed him a sealed scroll reel paper, not data. "The Synod has declared a ceasefire. Not because we fear you, but because we finally understand some fires should not be touched." Thorn took it. "Tell your leaders, we don't want your war. But if you start one with someone who calls us, we'll finish it." Vrolak bowed. Then he left. That night, the human fleet gathered above Viridia one last time. Below, fires lit the cities, not from bombs, but from cooking stoves, street lamps, and hope. Then, one by one, the ships opened their drives. Space bent. Light stretched. And with a final flash, they vanished toward home, but not all of them. The indomitable lingered. Captain Thorne stood on the bridge, watching the stars. "Sir?" asked his comms officer. "We're getting a signal, weak, encrypted, from the galactic core." Thorne didn't turn. "Play it." Static. Then a voice, cracked and desperate. "This is research vessel Astra's Hope. Qatari forces are gone, but something worse is here. Machines, ancient. Waking up, they're hunting all life. If anyone hears this, please send help." The voice faded. Silence filled the bridge. Then Thorne smiled. A small, tired, dangerous smile. "Patch it to all ships," he said, "and prep the long-range drive. Looks like we're not going home just yet." Far away, on Earth, children looked up at the night sky. They didn't know about Viridia, but they knew the stories of the ships that left to protect strangers, of the warriors who laughed in the face of death, and they knew, deep in their bones, that if the galaxy ever called again, the Deathworlders would answer, because that's who they were. Not conquerors, not saviors, just humans, from a world so cruel, so wild, so beautiful, that it taught them one truth above all. When someone is hurting, and they call your name, you show up, and you bring your fists. The Indomitable turned its nose toward the galactic core. Engines hummed. The storm was moving on, and the pale apes from the blue rock were ready for whatever came next.